at building. We're looking today at building your housing infrastructure, helping multiple housing entities work collaboratively. So again, if you would please keep yourself muted during this session, unless you are speaking during our Q&A sessions. And we're going to get started. We have two communities with us today, Wellfleet and Concord. We're going to start with Wellfleet, and we have two residents who are active in affordable housing in Wellfleet. We have Elaine McIlroy and Harry Terkanian. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about them, and then I'm going to hand it over to Elaine to start us off. So Elaine McIlroy worked as a director of the Wellfleet Public Library for 34 years, during which time she became interested in working on affordable housing, seeing the destabilizing effect the lack of it had on the community. As a director of the library, she oversaw the renovation of a 1930s candle factory into a new library. It's a beautiful building in Wellfleet. She has served on the Wellfleet Housing Authority for over a decade and also serves on the Community Preservation Committee and the new Wellfleet Affordable Housing Trust. She recently chaired a task force to issue an RFP and select a developer for a 46-unit affordable rental project in Wellfleet. As a volunteer, she is constantly learning from the shared experiences of housing advocates locally, as well as across the state and country. And then our second speaker, I'm just going to right away share Harry. He has lived in Wellfleet since 1970 and has served the town as moderator for almost 25 years, town administrator for 3.5 years, and on various boards and commissions, including the Affordable Housing Trust, Charter Review Committee, and Conservation Commission. Most of his professional life has been as a real estate attorney, with shorter stints as a police officer, computer programmer, car salesman, IT consultant, and town planner. I think all of that is partly what makes Harry so engaging and interesting. He has a BS in applied math, a law degree, as well as a master's degree in community engineering. So just step back just a little bit. I am Shelley with MHP. I didn't even introduce myself. A project manager. I do a lot of work with MHP, helping to support communities that have affordable housing trusts or trying to create them, as well as communities that have the CPA, Community Preservation Act. And as an agency, MHP is really focused on helping to increase the supply of affordable housing across the state. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn things over to Elaine and Harry to get us started.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Shelley. I'm going to say hello to everyone before I start sharing my screen. And I also want to say thank you to the Mass Housing Partnership for all the help and training you provide to assist us in this very complex and important work. Okay. I know each of us that are representing our towns today come from different situations with different setups, but we all have, we're large and we're small, but we all have a shared mission. And we're happy to be here today to share Wellfleet's experience with you. You probably know that Wellfleet is a small town, but like many of us, we have a big housing problem. Only 2.5% of our homes are recognized as affordable on the SHI. The average cost of a home today in Wellfleet is $870,000. We have no rentals, and many of our jobs are in lower wage sectors. So what are we doing about all this? In 1987, the town of Wellfleet voted at town meeting to adopt a housing authority. And I like to say that we're a small town housing authority. I know many towns have housing authorities with staff, and they own and they manage property But as a small town with elected volunteers, we don't do any of that. We have really functioned more almost like a housing committee or a housing trust. But we have been able over the years to use town-owned land to produce some small number of ownership and rental units. In 2001, the town had an affordable housing study task force, and they came up with the recommendation to institute a local housing partnership. And this is a town-appointed committee. It includes representatives from the Housing Authority, from Open Space, from the Planning Board, from the Zoning Board of Appeals, and members at large. So this was a great attempt to involve and collaborate and share housing information with other committees in town. And the Housing Authority and the partnership have worked well together over the years. We hold joint meetings, but at some point we did kind of find that we were both talking about the same things. Even though a chart had defined our different duties once the partnership was instituted. Something special for Wellfleet that I know a few other towns did. In 2005, the town of Wellfleet filed special legislation to have an affordable housing trust. And this was right around when the state was putting forward legislation also, but ours was already in progress. So instead of looking to adopt an affordable housing trust through the state legislation, we did ours through special legislation. The Wellfleet Housing Authority was designated as the trustees of the trust, so we liked that. We had some power, but we really didn't have any money. So I think the really big thing for a lot of us working in affordable housing was when the Community Preservation Act was established, and Wellfleet adopted it in 2005. One thing I should have added after the Community Preservation Act being accepted was that in 2016, the Housing Authority used community preservation funds to engage part-time housing specialist services. And that's when we really started to get more done. Our town did not have any professional staff devoted to housing or planning or economic development. So the use of community preservation funds to get us some part-time housing specialist services made a big difference. So we were really doing pretty well. So why the decision to form a municipal housing trust? I love that I can say we were doing pretty well, even though we only have 2.5% of affordable housing, but I think we were hopeful that we were doing well. So some of the main reasons that we looked into doing the housing trust, even though we were saying to ourselves, what is it going to do? What are our other groups going to do? We're a small town. Who are we going to get to serve on this? We had our reasons for doing it. This is the special legislation trust that Wellfleet that was passed in 2006. If you currently have a municipal housing trust, you know that the bylaws go on for 4 or 5 pages. This trust was very, it wasn't big on detail. It had the powers, but we felt that getting the backing of the state and joining with other communities that were doing the municipal housing trust would give us something more to work with. And another big reason was the Community Preservation Act, which for the first time for our small town really provided us with some serious funding. However, our special legislation trust wasn't really aligned with the Community Preservation Act, and particularly the provision in the Community Preservation Act to use funds to support affordable housing, in addition to create and preserve. So this was another big reason for looking into establishing the trust. And also we had gotten advice from other towns that had trusts that it was a way to look at adding additional expertise to your housing organizations. And I have to say that doing that, adopting the trust, has been a real catalyst for our groups in town, adding the expertise of someone like Harry, which you heard at the beginning. We were so grateful that he was willing to serve. We also added some other expertise in real estate with a current realtor who has served on the Habitats board and was fearless in telling sellers about our affordable housing programs and asking them to consider participating in things like that. So we did adopt the trust and had a lot of the questions about what are we each going to do, how are we going to do it, but we were very fortunate, and Harry will talk more about this. Within our first year of operation, we applied for and were accepted into the MHP's intensive trust training. And Harry will tell you more about that work. And I think the work we did with them can be duplicated by anyone who's considering adopting a trust or how their local groups can work together. In addition to wanting to be able to have a good collaboration with our own housing groups and within the town, we also wanted to collaborate with the public and draw them into our work, put a face on the work, put the human story behind it. So our local housing partnership came up with the wonderful concept of housing angels. And all three of our groups are involved in this. The main thrust is to educate people about the need and what we're doing, what they can do, and of course, to raise money for the trust. In addition to CPA funds and other housing, other funding sources, such as short-term rental tax that we hope are coming down the pike for us. We've been maybe more engaged in other trusts that I've heard about raising funds for the trust. So last summer, we had our first Housing Angels event. It was a wonderful outdoor event with music and stories about housing. And it was a great outreach to the public. We have another one planned for this summer. We had a brochure done that we put out to tell the world about our work. It's been pretty effective. We had a wonderful graphic designer, a young guy who lives in town and has a family, and we reached out to him to do it, and he insisted on doing it for free for us because of the work, how important the work is. And we had wanted it to be very beautiful, but he said, no, you have to have this scream out that you need help. And the partnership came up with the wonderful catchphrase, desperate times call for generous measures. So I want to just a couple more things. I'm going to skip one. One of our other outreach efforts is a new website, which will be our face for the public, which will combine the work of all our groups. This also is being done for us by a local web designer who also insisted on doing it for free as her contribution. So she is one of our housing angels. And it was really wonderful working with someone that wasn't as deep in the weeds as we are, because she took our information and she really massaged it for a more public consumption, I think, and we're very happy with it. We're going to launch it in about a month. And she encouraged us to, in addition to all the information we have, to think of a vision to put forward for the public too. So we have our catchphrase, we all need a place to call home. We have the wonderful logo, the little logo you see at the top done by a local artist. And it was our decision amongst the three groups to really call ourselves Wellfleet Housing as all together. And so our vision that we're putting forward for the public is a home is the foundation of everything in life. A healthy, sustainable, welcoming community is where everyone has a safe and decent place to live. When we are securely rooted in our community, we are more likely to invest in it and care for it. And that's the work that we are all doing together. So on the surface for us, sailing along together are three groups. Some of the more organic and simpler things we did to work together. Each group currently meets once a month, at least once a month. We have members that are on each other's groups, and each agenda for each meeting includes reports of the activities of what every group is doing. We do meet together occasionally. This year, the Housing Authority, the partnership, and the trust filed one joint annual report to the town instead of three separate reports. So those are sort of our internal collaborations, and then our external with the public are our new website. We have done a quarterly virtual newsletter, which we will try to keep up now, which will incorporate the work of all three groups. We're very fortunate to have local media that is interested in the housing issues and reports on it. So that's a great way for us to reach out to our public too. So that's about all I have. Harry's going to dive in deeper. And having been new to housing, we welcome him so, and he gives a perspective that helps us kind of climb our way up the ladder of what we're doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. So as Harry is pulling up, if you can finish sharing your screen, and then as Harry's pulling up his slides, I just want to let folks know that if you have questions or comments, please feel free to put those in the chat.
So there we go. Thank you, Elaine. You've done a wonderful job of describing the landscape and how we got to where we are. And thank you, Shelley, for hosting this. I'm going to try and time my comments so I don't encroach on too much of Keith's turf. This actually is a photograph taken in Wellfleet Harbor on July 14th, a couple of years ago. It's a very peaceful place. Where we found ourselves, as Elaine explained, Wellfleet adopted the Affordable Housing Trust Statute at the town meeting in late June of 2020, and it wasn't until fairly late in the year that the select board appointed trustees to the trust. In fact, our first trust meeting was in mid-December of 2020. And essentially, we found ourselves with a couple of challenges. The biggest one was, as outlined by Elaine, is how do we coordinate the now three housing organizations Wellfleet had, the Local Housing Partnership, Housing Authority, and the Housing Trust? And how do we also interact with the rest of town government and with the community at large? So with that challenge, we set about a planning process, and I'll talk about that in a little more detail. But first, in maybe it's unfair to say in a stroke of unusual genius, The select board appointed 7 trustees that shared membership on the Housing Authority, the Community Preservation Committee, the Local Housing Partnership, the Select Board, and the Board of Water Commissioners. And then the 2 people without portfolio were myself as a retired real estate attorney and a very active, professional, competent real estate broker to bring in some outside perspective. So we set about trying to figure out where we fit in the taxonomy of Wellfleet housing and what our mission should be and how we should proceed. So we decided we needed a plan. And in order to address that need, we applied to the Mass Housing Partnership for a grant, and we're successful, thank you, Shelley, in being awarded a planning grant. And our specific request was to determine how best to coordinate internally with the other housing organizations and communicate with our community. I'll talk more about that. In fact, I'll spend the majority of my time talking about that. But just first, a couple of basics. In organizing your housing trust, first you have to accept the statute. You should adopt a trust bylaw. You should consider adopting a declaration of trust. I'll talk about those things very briefly. And finally, the last 2 bullet points here speak to what you need in terms of a plan. You need to define what it is, what the work you're going to do is, and define your relationship with your constituency, your other housing agencies in your community, and people who are housing insecure, and everybody who has a piece of this issue. So first, quickly, the housing trust is a creature of statute. You have to accept the statute, and that's by a majority vote of the local legislative body, which in most towns is an affirmative vote at town meeting, unless you have a charter that provides otherwise, or you're a town like Barnstable with a town council form of government. You should adopt a housing trust bylaw. And the primary reason why I say that is because the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust statute allows towns to adopt bylaws that can add to, modify, or omit trust powers. And particularly in Wellfleet, Elaine's alluded to the real estate market in Wellfleet and how difficult, approaching impossible it is to find affordable rentals and affordable ownership opportunities. And in fact, you need approximately double the area median income to be able to afford a residential rent in Wellfleet. And you need roughly quadruple that to be able to afford to buy a single family residence in Wellfleet. It's a real reach. So one of the things we did with our Affordable Housing Trust bylaw is we expanded the scope of the housing trust's powers, and we chose to expand it to 120% of area median income in the bylaw, so that we'd be able to serve at least a portion of the community that is that has difficulty finding accessible housing. It's an open question whether we should have gone farther. I understand that Nantucket's threshold is 200% of AMI. But at any rate, that's a step that should be considered, and where you fit it in the planning process is up to you. I'm not going to speak about adopting a declaration of trust. In my view, most of the powers, responsibilities of a housing trust are defined by the statute and modified by the bylaw. A declaration of trust may be useful if the housing trust actually takes title to real estate, but beyond that, it really seems like a kind of a secondary thing. We chose, by the way, to use as a model for drafting our bylaw and our trust, the Town of Grafton bylaw and declaration of trust. But why do you need a plan? Well, you want everybody working toward the same goal in an organized, coordinated manner. I think you've all seen the Keystone Cops clips where, you know, one guy on the boat is rowing one way and the other guy on the boat is rowing a different way and the boat's going in circles instead of straight. Well, you really don't want to have that happen with a housing effort. So we were looking for two things. We were looking for a plan, and we were also looking for a way to define our relationship with the other housing agencies in Wellfleet. So what we did in the context of the technical assistance grant from Mass MHP is we set up a scoping committee that consisted of representatives from all three agencies. We were careful to make sure that none of the agencies were represented by a quorum of its members, so that we avoided it being a deliberation of a quorum of members and creating open meeting law issues. And that enabled us to work together to define a plan that was going to work for all three agencies. Typically, you'll find that a plan has three parts. A mission statement is really a broad statement, a general statement of the organization's overall vision. What long-term result do we want to achieve? And in Wellfleet, we wanted to make Wellfleet an approachable place for housing for everybody. The goals are typically specific, measurable objectives you want to achieve. An example might be to develop 5 units of subsidized housing inventory housing in each of the next 5 years. They should be measurable, both in terms of the end product and also in terms of when you deliver it. You know, to develop 50 units of housing without a deadline, you may never get there. But to try and establish goals that are specific, that you can look at periodically and say, yes, we achieved this goal. No, we've only partially achieved this goal. We need to do more in that area. And finally, strategies are concrete, specific steps toward achieving your goals. So, and there are some, if you talk to planning people, sometimes they break it down further into objectives and tactics, but this was enough for us. So we started with a long list of strategies, a long list of tasks. We didn't talk much about who was going to do what. And as we progressed through a series of meetings with Shelley's acting as a facilitator, we started assigning strategies and tasks to different groups. And in fact, we ended up, well, this is a very early one from early on in the process, but you can see how we start defining things that different groups are going to do, how we try and identify which group is going to take the lead, which group is going to support, or if another group is going to support. So that in the end, we ended up with a a mission statement. We ended up with a set of concrete goals and some strategies. But the real value of the process was it forced us to think about what we had to do and what resources we had to accomplish it and what resources we need. And one of the big resources that we need is money. Everybody needs, housing is expensive. And in Wellfleet, housing is a particular challenge because the amount of undeveloped land that's suitable for residential development in Wellfleet is almost non-existent. We were fortunate to find a parcel opposite the elementary school, which we have issued an RFP and actually awarded a developer to develop 46 units. But those opportunities just don't come along frequently, at least in Wellfleet. So we had to look at not just these big projects that we're going to, in one or two projects, solve our problems. We had to look for other things that we could do, down payment assistance programs, buy down programs where we would subsidize the purchase of a house in exchange for an affordability restriction. So in the end, we ended up with, okay, now it's decided not to advance for me. Excuse me. See if I can make it go backwards now. So in the end, we ended up with the Housing Authority adopted a mission statement, which is in the middle of the slide. A set of goals. There are only 2 goals there, but they're broken down into sub-goals. And then a series of strategies, which are the tools that we will use to achieve those goals. And there's a similar process that has been undertaken by the Housing Authority and the local housing partnership. So in the end, we end up with a set of plans that, while they're separate plans for each agency, they're consistent with one another. We each know where to look for publicity, for outreach. That's the local housing partnership. We know where to look for support for our programs, which is the Housing Authority, and the trust ends up being, in essence, the funding agency and the developer. But without the planning process that we went through, we really didn't have a structure, and now we have that structure, and that's been, I think, a valuable tool and will help us going forward. So I think at this point, I would entertain questions if there are any.
Yeah, Harry, great. Thanks so much.
Yep.
So first, just want to say, I wanted to speak to Harry's comments about the bylaw for Wellfleet defining low and moderate income as going up to 120% of the area median income. I'm kind of surprised no one brought that up in the chat. So the trust statute doesn't define low and moderate income explicitly. So what MHP suggests is that your local community look at existing definitions for low and moderate income. So if you're wanting everything that the trust supports to be on the subsidized housing inventory, then that would be a ceiling of 80% of the area at median income. If you are using CPA funds, CPA goes up to 100% of the area at median income. The statewide affordable housing trust that Mass Housing manages goes up to 110% of the area at median income. If you're wanting to go above that, you need to be thoughtful about that. You should likely bring in your solicitor or your town council. And above the 80%, it won't be counted on the subsidized housing inventory, even if you're defining moderate income to be higher. You just need to be thoughtful about how you do that, and you need to make the case. And there might be, some communities might actually have had legislative action to identify moderate income up to the 200% that was talked about with Nantucket. I will let others on this call. Perhaps Keith knows the answer to that. So if you do, you can jump in, but just be clear that the statute doesn't define it. A community can define that for themselves, but you need to be thoughtful about how you do that.
And thank you, Shelley. We did have a discussion with council about that, and we felt that that was as far as we could safely go without some enabling legislation, at least at this point.
Mhm. Fantastic. So also, we did have a couple questions for you, Harry. So one is, can you speak to the trust, your current trust assets? And if you yet have any kind of, I know that you're working kind of towards a budget, but do you have revenue, expenses? Do you have any, or news? So do you have any, if you could just speak to your financial position right now?
Okay. Wellfleet unfortunately has had a difficult time recently with some deficiencies in the accounting office. So in round figures, the trust has a $500,000 CPA grant from last year's annual town meeting. It has an amount still to be determined by audit, but I would estimate it about $200,000 in funding from the old Affordable Housing Trust that was established by special legislation. We've received a lot of donations, most of them small donations. I don't have an exact figure on that also because that's also pending audit, but that's probably in the $100,000 ballpark. So right now, if we were to get a back of the envelope number, it would be somewhere around $750,000 in cash. We've committed a portion of that to fund another buy down program. We anticipate that the developer of the 46 unit affordable project will be looking for a contribution, a community contribution, and we expect that some portion of that will, if not all of that, will come from the Affordable Housing Trust. So that's why we've looked at public fundraising like the Housing Angels, and that's why we have been lobbying to designate a significant portion of the short-term rental tax income for housing purposes. And we feel that we have strong support on the Wellfleet Select Board for that, to the extent fiscal requirements will allow us to do that. So that's kind of where we are after basically 15 months or 16 months of operation.
Fantastic, thank you. So Mark, we do see your hand up. I just want to go through a couple other questions first. So one quick one is Roberta's asking about CPA funds, if they can support 110% of the area median income. No, CPA is strong at 100%. That's the ceiling for CPA. We have a question about if there's a course on writing bylaws, and I don't know of any courses like that. I don't know if anyone else on the call, if you do, you can put that in the chat, answer that in the chat. And Harry, I think that you or Elaine referenced the Wellfleet's either average income or median income. If either of you did, do you mind repeating that for someone asking that question?
I think maybe I'll let Elaine do that. But what I understand is that to afford a single family rental in Wellfleet, you need an income of approximately double the 80% AMI figure. And to be able to service a mortgage on a single family residence, you need roughly quadruple that number. So it's really a bridge too far for most young families.
Elaine, do you have the actual number?
I don't. I was going to include a slide from the Cape Cod Commission that showed our median income and also the incomes of most of our a lot of our working sector. It's certainly Barnstable County's median income is quite high, although I think it went down this year, maybe somewhere in the 80,000. Wellfleet's is well below that, and I think we found that a huge part of our working population's incomes were between 25,000 and 45,000. So, you know, Wellfleet is a small town. We don't get our figures broken down quite as much as larger towns. We're sort of under Barnstable County's thing, which really isn't very reflective, I think, of our community. And I wish I had that slide to show you from the commission, but we could add that to the presentation online if we want to.
And that's reflective of the employment opportunities in Wellfleet. The vast majority of employment opportunities are retail and hospitality industries. So servers, chambermaids, waiters, store clerks, and those aren't occupations that lend themselves to high salaries. And it's just unfortunate that there are very few employment opportunities in Wellfleet that generate well-paying jobs.
So we're gonna, I'm gonna let Mark unmute himself and ask a question, and then we're going to move on. I am gonna ask Elaine to answer. There's a couple questions that are specific to you in the chat, if you wouldn't mind maybe answering those, but Mark, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, appreciate it. And this is very impressive. I live in Carlisle I'm on the Affordable Housing Trust, town of about 5,200. So my questions are more demographic information. The population, what is your water infrastructure? Is it any municipal services, whether fresh water or wastewater? And what is the attitude of residents? And I ask those because, you know, as I mentioned, we're a small town. We have entire septic and water resources. And our residents' attitude is, to paraphrase it and not be kind about it, is to say that, you know, we have a median income of $157,000 and, you know, we don't really recognize that there are people here who are house poor. So, and that are, you know, are seniors and families who need housing to work in the town or the area. Thank you.
Hi, Mark. Wellfleet, I saw a question wondering where Wellfleet was too. So make sure people know that Wellfleet is a small town on the Outer Cape. Our year-round population, I think, according to the census this year, was 3,200. It actually increased 27%, but that might be a temporary bump because of the people that moved to Wellfleet during COVID. But our summer population goes 16,000 to 20,000. We have some areas of town water. For our 46 unit development, the town voted to fund an extension of our water system, and we got a Mass Works grant, which we were very happy for. We don't have a lot of wastewater infrastructure. There are individual systems serving some parts of town, and we are going to have to do that for our 46 unit development also. You asked a question at the end that sounded intriguing, but I didn't hear it. I didn't get what you said, your last question.
It's really about the attitude of the residents, but it's almost, you've answered that by saying that the town supported extending the water supply system, which is a big investment, right?
Yeah, I think we're coming a long way with the understanding of the need. I mean, you know, it's been hard to judge things because of pandemic conditions, but this past summer, We had businesses that have been in business for years. For the summer, 7 days a week, had to limit their services. We've had businesses that had to close. I think people are, possibly more understanding of the really desperate situation that we're in, but that's really happening so much across the country even.
Yeah, one additional comment to follow up on what Elaine said is last year's annual town meeting, there were approximately 10 housing or tangentially housing related issues on the town meeting warrant. And they ranged from the bylaw for the Affordable Housing Trust to a zoning bylaw amendment to allow the creation of accessory dwelling units, special legislation, and almost every single one of them was adopted without debate and with unanimous or near unanimous votes. It really was a very strong statement of support for addressing the housing issue in Wellfleet, and we don't seem to have so far. We haven't seemed to run into well, it's my tax dollars, why are you spending them on this? And in fact, the project that we're just getting started with, the Lawrence Road project, the 46 unit project, the abutters have been really wonderful in terms of, how can we help this project succeed instead of, how can we prevent this from happening in our backyard? So it's been very gratifying.
So I just want to be mindful of the time. Thank you so much, Harry and Elaine, for sharing all the fabulous work that you're doing in Wellfleet. And I do want to point out again that there are a couple of questions specific to your work in Wellfleet in the chat. If you wouldn't mind perhaps giving some attention to those. Then I want to turn it over to Heath Bergman from Concord, just to give you a little bit of background about Heath. He is the chair of Concord's Municipal Affordable Housing Trust, and he's retired after 37 years as a municipal manager in Massachusetts, serving the towns of Littleton, Provincetown, Situate, North Andover, and Nantucket. He lives in Concord, where he chaired the town's Affordable Housing Trust Study Committee from 2019 to 2020, and has chaired the Housing Trust since its establishment in 2021. He also served on the board of advisors for the nonprofit Housing Nantucket. He is the immediate past president of the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, one of our regional planning agencies in the state, and chairs its legislative committee. He also volunteers as the ICMA MMMA senior advisor to active managers and assistants. And he was a housing hero. MHP highlighted him as a housing hero at our Housing Institute a few years ago. Heath.
All right, now I'm unmuted. All right, very good. Great. Thank you for that kind introduction, Shelley. Great job, Elaine and Harry and Wellfleet. And I missed the Cape. I was town manager in Provincetown for 17 years and always love to go back there and know just the sort of housing, affordable housing problems that you're having. What I would like to do is actually get there we go. What I'd like to talk about is how our housing entities can collaborate. And what I really want to say is please look for opportunities to engage with fellow housing entities. Glad to see so many folks on the call here today, a lot of municipal officials, a lot of committees. And there really are important opportunities for you to collaborate. And just to mention a few, housing production plan update process is always a great opportunity. A master plan update, which might bring folks together along with the public. Coalitions to support major proposals, initiatives. Many packages of proposals that go to our town meetings or to the local legislative body need coalitions of support, and it's important for everyone to be working together. And staying in touch is something you should do too, whether it's with regular joint meetings or with staff support. And there are really great opportunities. I'm grateful for the infrastructure that we have here in Concord. And since the question of where was Wellfleet, I thought I'd better answer, well, where is Concord? And it is 20 miles north and west of Boston. We've got Henry David Thoreau, Louisa May Alcott, Ralph Waldo Emerson. We'll debate with Lexington, and I'm meeting with their Affordable Housing Trust Study Committee next week, where the first shots were fired on April 19th, 1775. We've been in the housing business in Concord since at least 1961. Our housing authority has been in operation for that long. They operate over 200 units that serve almost 400 people. This is the group of entities that I'm showing here that existed prior to a municipal affordable housing trust coming on board. So this is the pantheon of groups that were there when we became the new kid on the block. Concord Housing Foundation has been around for 20 years. It's a nonprofit. It does fundraising and has contributed, brought over $1 million in private donations to housing work. Since 2004, we've had a community preservation committee, which cumulatively for all the CPA categories has recommended appropriation of over $27 million at town meeting, and 22% of those funds have been for community housing, according to our CPC's 2020 plan. Since 2007, another nonprofit, the Housing Development Corporation in Concord. It's established by state statute. It's appointed by the select board. The directors are. It is a major player in putting together public and private partnerships that lead to good things. The Christopher Heights Junction Village project will add 83 units to our subsidized housing inventory. More recently, the Assabet River Bluff project would acquire for open space and housing purposes land adjacent to the Assabet River in Concord and produce 5 affordable housing units. Those 4 entities, now together with the trust, convene on a quarterly basis as the Concord Housing Roundtable. We are brought there by the Regional Housing Services Office. At last week's MHP webinar, you met Liz Rust, the RHSO director, who's done great work for us and does great work for our neighboring communities as well. And it's an important opportunity to bring us all together. And I want to mention for just a moment the advantage of having a regional entity to help you with the expertise that you need to address affordable housing issues. Many small towns, many medium-sized towns don't have all of the in-house staff necessarily. And when you can pool your resources for monitoring of affordable units, for all the things that you need to do to support housing, doing it as a region is a good approach. When I was town administrator in Littleton, we formed, well, actually we asked if we could get into this one and they didn't have room for us. So we went and formed our own based in Hudson. It's now called the Assabet Regional Housing Consortium, where I think there are now 9 communities that are supported. Another example, Metro North Regional Housing Services hosted in Reading. Please look at the option of being supported by a regional entity. Many of the communities who have accepted the CPA can be funding their participation with funds from the Community Preservation Act. Just a sketch of Concord from our standpoint of Chapter 40B. We are above the 10% goal based on the 2010 census. We're at 10.41%. We project that we will remain above 10%, barely 10.04% once the 2020 census figures kick in and DHCD calculates for us what the total year-round housing figure is as our new denominator. In Concord's case, we're hopeful that we'll stay above through later this year by adding those 83 countable units from Christopher Heights later this year, add those to our numerator. But Concord's housing needs go far beyond just meeting the 10% goal. In fact, it's been the voters that have told us that we need to do something about it. It was a petitioned article in 2017, and this shows the path to getting to a Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. In 2017, the voters petitioned town meeting to establish an affordable housing trust and look at how the town could become a major player through public funding to make a difference in providing housing. We have a growing elderly population, including yours truly, that it's very expensive for folks to live here. Town employees find it difficult to live here. The median sales price just last month for the town of Concord, $1.4 million, and many houses are exponentially higher than that as well. So our path led to actions by town meeting, which I'll go through, and by 2021, we had a municipal affordable housing trust up and operating. But it goes back to the work that our Affordable Housing Funding Committee did between 2017 and 2019. And their report to town meeting voters in 2019 said that Concord needs predictable, sustainable revenue sources so funds are readily available when opportunities arise. Because without the necessary funds to act quickly, valuable opportunities could be missed. So the measures that they were brought forward as a package to town meeting were an affordable housing trust, which we did in a two-step process, first accepting the statute and then a year later adopting a bylaw, filing home rule petitions for long-term dedicated funding sources for the trust, a real estate transfer fee and building permit surcharge, which the committee thought might raise $2.6 million per year. And in the meantime, to approve annual funding of $500,000 per year. And that's been done 3 years in a row, total of $1.5 million thus far. And we've requested funds for next year. So the bylaw that was approved in September 2020, that was our annual town meeting. It was delayed because of COVID. But our Affordable Housing Trust Study Committee, which I got to chair, pitched that the housing trust would complement the town's existing affordable housing efforts, entities, and programs by acting quickly when affordable housing opportunities arise. That's really the special place that we can play by acting when an opportunity comes up. And to make sure that it would be a collaborative process and make sure that even though the bylaw we wrote said the Affordable Housing Trust need not obtain select board approval for expenditure of trust funds, But we did want the select board to have to approve when the trust borrowed money or when it accepted or disposed of any property. Those things we want the select board to approve. But the bylaw specifically directed the trustees to develop policy goals and statements that are consistent with the town's adopted housing goals and subject to approval by the select board to serve as guidelines for the trust. This is no rogue agency. We are following the town's adopted housing goals. Our guidelines are approved by the select board. In fact, the select board just approved them earlier this month following a process that we went through, which I'll get to in a minute. We've been in operation since last September. We did approve a declaration of trust and recorded it at the registry. The select board transferred to the trust that cumulative $1.5 million that had been appropriated by recent town meetings. We've requested additional funding for the coming year, either from a town meeting appropriation or from ARPA funds. We definitely want to explore ARPA funds as a potential. And we've already voted to expend funds from our available balance, $650,000 towards that Assabet River Bluff project that I mentioned. And our home rule petitions are proceeding. That both the real estate transfer fee and the building permit surcharge have been reported out favorably by legislative committee and have been read twice in the Senate. And we are part of a larger coalition. We're one of now 9 communities that have filed a home rule legislation for a real estate transfer fee for affordable housing. And we also support the statewide bill that's under consideration, and hope that and all of these bills have been reported out favorably thus far. So we hope that this might be the year that some major progress is made in this area. Now, one of the things that we did to engage our fellow housing stakeholders was to involve them in the development of guidelines for the trust. And so we jointly, and first off, what we did was using our help at the Regional Housing Service Office is identify what are our housing goals that we're implementing. We have a master plan and Vision Concord from 2018. We have a housing production plan that was last approved in 2015, and we're in the process of updating it now. And our Community Preservation Committee, which, as I say, has been in the business of affordable housing since 2004, has guidelines, which frankly we followed this year in looking at the applications before us. So we convened our housing stakeholders to help us. We launched at the Concord Housing Roundtable in November the idea that we wanted to get input from our fellow housing entities and to have them help identify which of the town's housing goals should the trust prioritize. We met jointly with the Housing Authority and the Housing Foundation and the Housing Development Corporation. We shared our work product with the Community Preservation Committee and others. And we brought to the select board an interim set of guidelines, which they approved just a couple of weeks ago. And their interim guidelines, we saw that we really are in 2 different worlds based on how much money is coming in. Right now, our annual funding level is $500,000 a year. For the future, we're hopeful that it could be at least a couple of $1 million. But that is a significant difference in what one or the other might be. And in our interim guidelines, just to illustrate, and this goes to a point that Shelley was raising, we put together in our guidelines, we attached this reference document, which identifies what low and moderate income limits are for various programs and funding sources. because the trust needs to keep track of what the rules are for each of the funding sources. CPA was mentioned, what counts on, what you need to do to count them on the subsidized housing inventory is another. We looked at ARPA funding. We looked at what our measure that has been passed under our zoning bylaw. We even looked at the home rule petitions that we had been previously filed to see how they identified what the definitions of low and moderate income for, all things that you should have in front of you. We will be updating our guidelines later for the long term when the dedicated long-term funding sources are implemented, but also when our housing production plan is updated and approved, which will be later this year or early next year. In fact, we just launched as a joint effort the updating of the housing production plan. It was unveiled at Concord's Housing Roundtable a week ago. And we look forward to working with our housing partners in producing a product for the select board and the planning board approval and approval by DHCD. So the message is to look for opportunities to collaborate, look for big things to do together. And I'm just going to leave you with a couple of examples that I have worked on. One was when I was town administrator in Littleton, we packaged the Affordable Housing Trust adoption in a series of measures, all 5 top housing goals from a master plan update in 2017. We brought them all to town meeting as a package. They were all approved. And amazingly, I was just so proud of the tag team of planning board, select board, and council on aging that shepherded this package through our town meeting that year. And the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust component, it was done in one sitting. It was a single article to accept the statute and adopt the bylaw for the trust. And at the same time, an inclusionary zoning bylaw was passed, which provided for in lieu of payments under certain categories that would go into the trust rather than providing affordable units on site. And the very last example I'm going to show is wearing the hat as a member of the board of advisors for the nonprofit Housing Nantucket. Do you know there's a place in Massachusetts, and it's on Nantucket Island, where you will be approached by your Affordable Housing Trust, who's going to say, please help us achieve safe harbor. We need 22 affordable housing units on the books in 6 months. And oh, by the way, here is $10 million to make it so, $3.6 million a grant and nearly a $7 million 50-year construction loan. There are many housing stakeholders on Nantucket that work together. And just as Housing Nantucket was undertaking a strategic planning process in 2020, but what could we do to best serve this collaboration? We were approached by the town. And the Housing Trust top goal was to achieve safe harbor, in part by creating and financing public-private partnerships for development of SHI eligible units on appropriate sites, working within existing zoning regulations for the sites. That's all. You'll recognize that language. What that's about is taking ownership of how affordable housing happens, by being proactive and not being reactive to 40B proposals that come in. And Nantucket Town Meeting voters, I applaud, because they have annually been appropriating sums like $15 million, $20 million per year for affordable housing development. And so you can believe me that Housing Nantucket is looking for further opportunities to collaborate with the town. So I'm delighted to be able to share this information with you. Happy to be a resource and to answer questions. And thanks very much.
So thank you so much. And we do have a question, if you would be willing to share access to the guidelines that were approved by recently in Concord. And I'm wondering if maybe we even ask you if we can connect it with the materials for this presentation.
Yes, yeah, you sure can. In fact, my PowerPoint presentation has links throughout, hypertext links, and I'm including, I'm definitely including the links to the, well, all the materials you saw, including including our policy guidelines.
Fantastic. We'll leave it at that then. But Keith, I'm wondering, one thing that I'm just wondering if you would touch on is in Concord, the community first accepted the trust statute and then the next year presented a bylaw. Would you just speak to that process and why the community decided to do it that way?
Sure. Well, I have to say, I came in to the picture when I was asked in Concord, when I was asked to be on the committee to draft the bylaw. So I'm not sure what the decision-making process was to split it up into 2 steps, but I will say in hindsight, it gave us an opportunity to figure out what's the best way. We spent a year developing the bylaw, getting public input. And I think that some of the things in the bylaw we wouldn't have done if it had simply been a part, just sort of a boilerplate part. But I was more involved in Littleton, where we were putting together a package of things from the town, from the master plan. So, but I'd be happy to talk to anyone about the pros and cons of splitting them up or doing them together. If it's a matter of time, do them together.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So just wanted to remind everyone that we are going to be posting this recording as well as the PowerPoint presentations to the Housing Toolbox. And my colleague Emma did put the link in the chat. So that will be up probably later today or tomorrow. Thank you so much to our speakers, Heath, Harry, and Elaine. We appreciate so much you being here and sharing from your experiences in your communities. For those listening, it might be overwhelming sometimes to hear communities that have spent a lot of time building their housing infrastructure. It didn't happen overnight in either of these community organizations. The boards weren't created yesterday. They've been working towards this point for many years. So I hope that you're hearing that. If you're just getting started, or if you only have one board, I hope you're hearing that it does take time to build this infrastructure. I'm just going to quickly share my slides to remind you of the 2 sessions that we have coming up. Next week, we're looking at using CPA funds to bond for affordable housing development. So we're looking at the community of Orleans. In this example, we have Stuart Saganor from the Community Preservation Coalition, also going to be presenting more broadly on bonding. And then we have Orleans. We're going to be speaking to the developer as well as the treasurer in Orleans about bonding $2 million to support housing. Oops, so sorry. That's next week on the 23rd. And then on the 30th, we're doing a Affordable Housing Trust kind of 101 presentation. So really geared towards new trustees on trust boards, as well as communities that are considering creating a trust. So thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you to the speakers. Feel free to follow up with any of us with additional questions. Take care.